Boru Aboye, we have a proverb that tells us, as the mind thinks, so will your obi speak. As the mind thinks, so will your obi speak. Although in West Africa, they would say, as the mind thinks, so will your obi be accepted, because the mind is here. Here in the West, the mind is here. But that's a secondary lesson. What the proverb is trying to help you to understand is that, there's a relationship between how you think and what you experience. So when you're going before the Orisha and you make your prayers and you cast your obi and you're trying to make, some sense of why the obi has turned the way it has, someone may say that proverb to you. Well, as the mind thinks, so the obi will speak. They want you to understand that if you want the obi to look differently on the tray, then you got to think differently within yourself. And that's the relationship. What starts inside of you is what is going to manifest outside. And it's a fantastic lesson. I like the lesson because it has greater implications around, your spiritual planning and understanding that what you think is what is going to also be revealed when you go to cast Ifa, for example. Now, this is the School of Orisha Studies, and I'm your instructor, Obafemi Origunwa. Today's lesson is all about the importance of spiritual planning. A lot of times, we make this mistake. It's very common that people make a mistake. We think of divination as planning. Right? People think that I'm going to go into get a reading, and I'm going to come out with a plan. Okay, and that's not necessarily the case, especially if you don't go into the reading with a plan, right? And you gotta have that in mind before you actually sit down before Ifa. You may have a dilemma. You may have some pressing issue, right? You may know that you need a solution, and that's a very good place to begin with putting out fires and addressing specific concerns. But when it comes to the long-term, trajectory, you need more than an interest in solving problems. You've got to actually have a plan. All right? You've got to have a plan. You got to go into the reading with a plan. And then Ifa will address the quality of your plan. Ifa will address the people involved in your plan. Ifa will address the timing associated with your plan. Okay? But if you go in without a plan, you're probably not going to come out with a plan. Okay, now this is really important. I go through this in a lot of detail in the T1TY. As a matter of fact, the T1TY membership, that's one of my programs, T1TY. T1TY really is organized around spiritual planning. That's the main driving value that I'm offering you in T1TY, because what you do is you start off with, you get 3 Ifa readings per year, but there's a workshop. There's a workshop that's built into that process, wherein I take you through some specific questions that provoke specific kinds of activities in your mind to make you think about, okay, wait a minute, what are my real priorities here? What am I trying to achieve? What do I already have, in my hands, and how can I put this into effect to go in a certain direction? This is what I really want to know. All right. So T1TY has that built into the process, that you repeat this process, and it's set up in such a way that you can then, continue. You every few months you've got these benchmarks, and you can continue to come back and look at where am I in relationship to my original intent, and you're juxtaposing all that against what Ifa gives you as far as feedback on your plan. Super important. That is a real spiritual plan. That's going to give you a framework for time, for resources, for people, and creating some specific kinds of outcomes in your spiritual journey and in your journey overall, right? It doesn't just have to be based on, your progression towards initiation and the time you put in after the fact. It could be, in your family or in your business or, any other, your health, right? All those things could be organized by your spiritual plan. Now, the consequence of not having a spiritual plan is very detrimental. It's very chaotic and very confusing, and unfortunately, it's kind of the rule. This is what people are accustomed to at this point. And I liken it to, saying that you want to build a house without a blueprint, right? You go and you may say, oh yeah, I've got all the resources. Okay, I've got the wood, and I've got the piping, and I've got the wiring for the electrical system. I even have the furniture. I got the tiles for the kitchen floor. I got everything I need for this house. And now I'm going to pick a site after I have acquired everything. Now I'm going to find a place, and I want the living room, I think, to be there, and then I want the kitchen next to that. And you start building these rooms one by one. You build the kitchen, you build the living room, you build the dining room, you build the bathroom here, you build the bedroom there, and then you build the right. By the time you finish all that, it's going to be a chaotic house. And will have wasted a lot of money, and probably created a whole bunch of confusion amongst all these different workers, right? It just doesn't make sense. That's not how you build a house. You get a blueprint, you lay everything out. If you want to move something, you just erase the lines and you draw them over here, and you have all the dimensions, and you got the scope, and you can map out the cost. All of that happens before you swing a hammer, right? It just makes sense. Well, it's the same with your journey of life, with your spiritual journey. You don't need to be accumulating a whole bunch of beads and a whole bunch of pots and a whole bunch of titles without any idea of who you are, why you're here, and what you need to do, right? You figure that part out first. Then it's going to make sense for you to accumulate different kinds of spiritual resources, make certain kinds of spiritual connections and relationships, and be involved in certain kinds of spiritual activities, because you already have a plan for how you're going to move from step 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So divination is not planning. Okay. Planning is planning, and then you take your plan and you run it by your babalawo or your yalorisha or whatever the case may be, and they're going to tell you the value and the quality of that plan. Aboro aboye, aboshishe.